And welcome once again to another edition of Footnotes. Pastor Mark here, and today in the studio I am joined by three wonderful, excellent, beautiful people who are currently traveling with Life Action Ministries. But by the time you hear this podcast, they'll be long gone on to their next adventure. But we're excited because today we've asked them into the studio to share their story. So I'm joined today with Luke Horinko, Kassie Adams, and Chloe Wells. So welcome, guys, to Footnotes.
Thanks.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
We're glad that you're here. So just for reference, now you guys just finished a summit conference with us here at Broadway.
Yes, sir.
And you're getting ready to head to Alabama.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Are you scared about that? Were you scared about coming to Mississippi? Because, Luke, you're from Ohio, so you probably thought everyone here will have no teeth. And Chloe, you are from Michigan.
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever heard the song "I Was Born in Michigan"? It goes like this: I was born in Michigan, and I wish and wish again I was back in good old Michigan. You know that song?
No, I don't think so. I've never heard it.
Are you really from Michigan then?
Yes, I
That
am.
is the question. Well, anyway, Chloe from Michigan. And then we have Kassie Adams, Kassie with a K, who is from the great, glorious country of Texas.
That's right.
And so, Kassie, you lived right outside of Canton. Actually, your parents and I were talking. I preached at a church in Sand Flat, Texas, not far from where your parents grew up and not far from where you lived in Canton. So we know some of the same people.
I know. I thought that was so cool. It's like such a small world.
Yeah, down in the neck of the woods. Your dad was like, oh, yeah, I know him, and he worked for the city. And I'm like, yeah, well, do you know this guy? And we just started, so it's good to have you. So, Kassie, you knew Mississippi people had all their teeth. But I'm not sure Luke knew that.
No,
I'm
really
not sure that Chloe knew that. So I was asking, are you afraid to go to Alabama? Because they're worse over there.
The only reason I'm scared is because I'm going to meet a bunch of Alabama fans, and Ohio State fans and Alabama fans don't always get along. So just praying for the best.
Well, I'll tell you,
I'm going to try to be a good light, though.
I'm not sure people in the SEC realize there are other teams out there.
That's a very good point.
It's like Americans with soccer. It's like, wait, there's another thing called football?
Exactly.
Oh, okay. Well, you can have that. You can have that.
It's got Ohio State football.
Oh, I see. The Buckeyes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
OH.
So we're going to talk with these three fantastic people. Now, you are all young college-age students. Let's establish that because everyone can't see you. So just real quick, ladies, would it offend you if I asked your age? Probably not now. Okay. So
Maybe
Kassie,
in 20 years.
Kassie, how old are you right now?
I am 20.
Okay. How old are you, Chloe?
I'm 21.
21. And how old are you, Luke?
18.
Oh, the young guy over here.
Yeah.
All right, 18. You guys have given a year of your life to travel with Life Action, and you have such interesting stories. I heard your stories at North Point Chapel. Steve, who is the leader of your blue team, had you come up, and he told me, I just wanted the students to see that we're real. We're real people. Mm-hmm. The students probably thought, oh, these Life Action kids, what have they ever done wrong except probably say no to their parents one time. And we don't want to listen to them because they're just going to get up here and talk about Jesus. But you were really real. And honestly, I gotta say this. I thought your testimonies was one of the best things through all of Life Action. So I asked you last week, can you please give me an hour? I want to talk with you on the podcast. I want to hear your stories. I want the rest of the church to hear your stories. I think it would be so neat and so interesting. So I'm excited to have you guys here.
Thank you so much.
All right, so what we're going to do, we opted ladies first, and Kassie said she was going to go first because everything in Texas is bigger and better, and she said, I'm from Texas, so I'm going first. So Kassie Adams, you had an interesting testimony, and I want you to just tell us what that involved and why you were asked to share.
Yeah, so I started dating a guy in the 8th grade. Yes, everyone was like, oh, this isn't a real relationship. But I was like, yes, he was God sent. I prayed, and there was this man, and it was just perfect. So we started dating, and it went on. I was someone who was super hardcore. I was like, I don't want anybody who does, drugs. I don't want to date anybody who drinks. I was like, no, that's not for me. Soon to found out that he was doing those things. And he was like, oh, it's not that big of a deal, like, I'm going to stop, And so I was like, okay, instead of, listening to that intuition inside of, hey, this is already a red flag. So we ended up dating all through high school. I went off to college. He went into the military. And just throughout that, it progressively gotten into a manipulation state, into emotional abuse, which all of this I did not see. So he had taken pretty much all my friends away. There was the mental abuse, emotional abuse, turned into sexual abuse, and just pretty much everything across the board was just insane. I went to an actual Christian college in Springfield, Missouri, called Evangel University.
I know that university. Yes.
I went there for a semester, and he had gotten honorably discharged out of the military for certain reasons. And just with that and him kind of pushing, I don't want you to have any friends here. Like, you can't be friends with anybody because if they're a guy, then that means you're doing bad things. So then it led me to, I don't like being here. So I ended up leaving and going back to Texas. At that point, it turned into, hey, like, we should get engaged and we should get married. And I was like, rock on. But my parents and family were like, oh, no, this is not what's going to happen. So secretly, without me knowing, they were all praying that this relationship would fail and that I would get my eyes open to all of the things that were happening. And throughout the school years, I'd been told that he had been cheating on me and being with other people and doing all these certain types of drugs that I had no idea was happening. And it led to me questioning him. So it got turned into, are you going to believe me or are you going to believe what all these people are showing you? And I was like, I'm crazy. I'm messed up. It turned into, it's my fault for questioning. And he had talked to my parents about getting engaged and talked to his family. So I was like, okay, we're on the right track. I thought he was saved.
Did he go to church with you?
He would go to church with me and play his role, which I thought was real, which deep down I knew wasn't real. So it led all to that. And then there was just a snap. He became more aggressive. He became angry and constantly yelling at me for everything. And he was like, we need to take a break of separating. So I was like, okay, no big deal. And through that whole time, I was praying for him. I was praying to God, please give me answers that I need to see. If it's wrong, take me out. If it's right, fix it. And we had met up. It was a Thursday. I remember the date. And I had gone to his house and I was like, I pray for you, like, do you pray for me? He's like, no, I don't pray for anybody. I'm like, you don't pray for people? I was like, you want to get married and you don't pray for people. And it was just, you could just see anger. And I think that's what really kind of scared me, is because I saw so much anger in his eyes. And I had checked his phone. Somehow God gave me the ability to remember a password that I couldn't. And it just opened up to everything. And I was like, this is not a godly relationship. He was like, God told me to do this. I was like, God doesn't tell you to commit, adultery and all of these different things. So I left and I was just destroyed. I was so broken inside. Everything I knew was gone. Everything I knew was wrong. And there was no other option but to go to God. That Sunday was coming up, my mom was like, do you want to go to church? I'm like, I'm going to church. And I spent every moment. Since then, I have not missed a single Sunday. I've tried not to miss anything out, because that's my happy place to be, is with God and around him. And just being able to be a part of this group was insane. It was completely God sent on what needed to happen for me. And my parents are like, yes. They're like, I'm sorry this happened to you, but we've been praying for this. And there was so many people praying for me to get out of what I was in because of how harsh it was on me. And there's still times that I get almost PTSD moment where I'm terrified and I don't trust anybody, but I've slowly been able to give it to God and be able to rely on him, and that he knows what I need. He's closing all the doors that need to be closed, and trust me, he'll slam them shut if he needs to.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you, let's go back. 8th grade, you started dating this guy. You thought he was a Christian. He would go to church with you. I want to reestablish that. So you were in this relationship and could not see some of the things that were obvious to other people who were trying to counsel you, pray for you, talk to you. Why do you think sometimes people get in these relationships and they can't see or they don't want to see?
I think it's a bit of both. There's some things that you just don't realize are happening, like the mental and emotional kind of state. You just think, oh, I'm wrong,
Because it's always your fault.
Because it's always your fault.
It's never the other person's fault.
Oh, no, it's never the other. It's always your fault. And if you tell them it's their fault, it just goes downhill from there. And then there was stuff that I saw that I just didn't want to see, like knowing that he was probably doing drugs while we were together and just saying, oh, no, I wasn't doing it. But it's something you can see on a person. Like, I can see that you've been doing something that you haven't been doing. So then you bring it up and they're like, no, you're dumb. Why would you ever think that? Like, you don't
total
trust me.
denial. You're just in denial.
Yes.
Yeah. And the reason I bring that up, there's probably other young ladies that might be listening or heard you at Life Action saying, maybe I'm in that same situation. What would you say to them? Because abuse is out there today. It's a word that's thrown around. Sometimes it's legitimately brought up, and sometimes even pastorally I go, is it abuse? I mean, you don't know, because nowadays anything could be classified abuse.
Yeah.
And you can't question it. You can't talk about, oh, it's abuse. Okay, well then you can divorce your spouse. Okay, let's do that. So sometimes, maybe people in that situation, what would you say to them? And then what would you say to caregivers like pastors and teachers and parents that maybe can see some signs that aren't good and maybe they don't know what to do? So what would you say from your experience?
So for someone that's in it, I definitely say, as I said at the school, get out as fast as you can. It's not something that you ever really want to do, and it's extremely hard to get the nerve to do that. And the longer you stay, the worse that it gets. So have friends that you really know are your friends, even your parents. I relied on my parents a lot, of someone that you trust and love to be there to pick you up, and having God in there to pick you up whenever you're going to fall, because it's going to happen. So yeah, just getting out of that as quickly as possible and getting rid of everything you know about the person, blocking them, removing their numbers, removing their family's numbers, just getting them out of the picture completely. And then for caregivers' sake, honestly, just keep secretly praying. I had many people come up to me saying, hey, he's treating you terribly. Or, hey, there's someone better out there that is actually going to treat you right. And I just didn't want to believe it. I'm like, no, you don't know what you're talking about. So constantly kind of bringing that up in a sense where it's not going to lead to an argument, but just a subtle knowledge of, I'm here when you need to talk, and I know this isn't right. But just that constant prayer of, God, get him out of what needs to be out. Close the door that needs to be closed, because thank the Lord that with the time that he had, he was able to give that to everybody, of all who prayed, that to close that door completely.
Did your parents ever confront you through the whole process and say, hey, Kassie, this guy is not what we want. He's not what you need. They did. So you're shaking your head.
Yes, a lot.
Like, as a dad, I'm one of those dads, like, I will not allow my daughter to be in a situation. And then sometimes daughter gets mad and says, you don't understand, Dad. You don't know. And
oh, yeah, that happened a lot. Me and my mom would get in so many arguments.
So your parents were not passive about this?
No, they were very straightforward. They did not like the relationship at all. Neither did my siblings. My siblings even...
Because you have a twin.
Yes, she was very... And even her now husband were very on the... This is not what... They can see it. They know it. They've heard stuff that I still haven't heard about. There's just so much. And they're like, this is not what you need. This is very bad.
And Cassie's like, nope, I don't hear you. I ignore it. I want to believe that this is going to work. So they prayed, and you credit the Lord who just basically opened your eyes and caused you to see, and then you ran.
Yes, I'm about to say, I saw what happened. I did not. I was like, this is done. And then just as the weeks went by, I was like, oh, I was able to finally talk. And I was like, I see what you guys were talking about there. Mm. Oh, I can see how that was a problem. And it just all started unraveling of, wow, I am so thankful. I was not thankful to begin with. I was very angry. But I can say I am so thankful that everything had happened, because there's no telling. If I probably would have been in that relationship any longer, it probably would have gotten to a physical state. And everyone that I've been around who saw that relationship all knew that that was the road that was going to be led down. So I just praise God over and over again.
Steve Canfield, who's head of the Blue Team, he had a coffee bag one of the nights, and he talked about how really only God can change hearts. But when God makes things right, your life, essentially works. And he used this coffee bag and talked about how his son had sent him this coffee, and he tried to open it, but he didn't realize he was opening it at the wrong end. And later he realized, hey, there's this other end that actually is meant to be opened, and he turned it around, and when he turned it around, it opened properly and everything worked as it should. And he said, look, God's got to turn the bag around. That was the illustration. God's got to turn the bag around. Until he does, things aren't going to be right. Yeah. And I can't change anybody's bag. I can't make anybody do what they should. Only the Lord can. So pray. And I love what he said. He said a lot of times we go to other people with problems. We try to solve the problem, and we pray last. But reverse that. Pray first. And I think that's what you're saying, Kassie, that people were praying for you, and their prayers have been answered. So
can I speak to that?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, Chloe.
So just kind of going back to what you were talking about with, like if it was like the person's choice, or like if they had control over.
Yeah, like did she recognize the situation?
Yeah,
or,
yeah. So like I think what you guys were saying is totally true, but I also want to add, like, a lot of times it's the feelings and the desire for the attention and the love is so overpowering that it doesn't matter whether or not you're intentionally choosing to not see the things, or if you do see them and if you don't see them, it's just so overpowering that, like, your drive to just want to be loved is so great that it doesn't matter how many people tell you what's going on or how much you already know what's going on. You just want, because sometimes the person is still giving you that. They're still giving you that love and affection that you desire, even though it's technically like false love. So then you think that there's still that hope and that possibility that
they're meeting
it could
a
work
need,
out.
and you're like, oh, I hope this fixes and works.
Yeah, and I think...
And do you have to come to that place where Christ becomes that love, that we don't often realize he can be? Yeah. So, Kassie, real quick, neat story. Steve Canfield said that Easter Sunday this year, he was just traveling through. They didn't have any appointments. So he decides to just go to a church in Canton, Texas, stops in just to celebrate Easter. He sees you singing and gives his card to the pastor's wife and says, hey, tell that girl if she's ever interested in touring with Life Action, here's my card. Steve didn't know the pastor, didn't know the pastor's wife, didn't know you. So you end up calling months later, I understand, and it went from there. And I got to say, you have an incredible voice. So the Lord, really blessed the Blue Team to be able, the Lord just sovereignly brought Steve to your church on Easter Sunday.
He sure did. It was definitely, I kept saying, I was like, there's so many coincidences. Everyone's like, stop saying it's a coincidence. It was definitely a insane divine plan that there was no other answer besides, wow, God just did the biggest thing that I had ever seen in my life. It was so cool.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, that's awesome, Kassie. Thank you for that. So, Chloe, let's come to you. You
Yeah.
have an interesting story as well. You shared this with the student body. And if I may be so bold to say, some people might say, oh, did you hear that testimony? That's pretty raw, pretty radical. I would say any Christian who thinks this is not a forefront issue has their head in the sand.
Yeah.
Because what you're about to share is really going on. It's probably going on in our churches, most definitely probably an issue with some of the kids at the school where you spoke. Now, I'm not saying I know. I'm just saying, there's probably under the water, this is probably an undercurrent issue. And it's definitely in the culture. Everywhere we turn, it's all over the culture. So Christians have got to have good testimonies about this. And I'm so thankful for your testimony. Tell us how God brought you through and what he's done in your life up to this point.
Yeah. So growing up, my grandpa was like kind of the rock of our family. Obviously Jesus is the rock, and like he is he should be your foundation. But my grandpa really kind of held our family together. And I was really close with him. He was an amazing role model. He portrayed Jesus for me. He was kind of like a father figure in my life. And when I was 13, he passed away from cancer. So Jesus is supposed to fill this void in all of our hearts. But for the time being, as a child, because my grandpa was that role model for me, like he kind of filled that void, quote unquote. And so when he passed away, it just kind of like unveiled my heart to the void that was already there. Even though I consciously didn't realize it, that was the problem, I just began to start trying to fill that void with other things. And I started to get into relationships, back to back into drugs and alcohol. And I just tried to fill that void with temporary things. So yeah, for a good 2 years, I tried to fill that void with relationships mainly. And when I was 14, I started to become attracted to girls, and I came out as bisexual. That went on for a little while. And when I was just before I turned 16, I met this girl, and we started dating. Like, we got pretty close, but after about 2 months, I went out of town and she broke up with me while I was gone, which was pretty hard. I was already struggling pretty mentally. There was already a lot of emotional, verbal abuse going on that was starting to take a toll on my identity. And after that, like I was saying earlier, that drive and passion to be loved and given affection that we should be getting from the Lord just overpowered everything that I saw. So I just kept getting back together with her. We kept breaking up and getting back together over the course of like 2-3 years. And it got more consistent as time went on. But through those years, the abuse just got worse. And it just really started to make me like contemplate who I was. And not just this relationship, other things in my life. Like, I had always struggled with friends at school. I always felt like the outcast. And so just wherever I went, I never felt loved and accepted for who God made me to be. This relationship went on for about 3 years, and a year in, I would say, she came out to me as transgender, which to me wasn't really a surprise. She had already like dressed as a guy and just was kind of living out in the demeanor, but like I didn't think that, I don't know, it just wasn't, it kind of surprised me because I wasn't expecting it, but I was trying to be fully supportive, but as the time went on and things got worse, I started to feel like I was trapped in the wrong body and that I was supposed to be somebody else. And basically it's so crazy how our brains work, because once I started to like think that I was supposed to be somebody else, my mind, I like took on that mindset, and I actually saw myself as if I were supposed to be a guy. Like, I don't know if that's making any sense, but
almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy.
kind of.
That's what they would call it in psychology, or a placebo effect. You tell yourself something enough, and then you begin to believe it, and then you begin to act upon it, and then it becomes reality. You see it in everything that you're doing.
I literally
something
saw
like that.
myself, like, my physicality felt like I was a guy. Obviously, there's other things that play into that, but so that, when I came out as transgender, that went on for about a year. And I was still, throughout this time, I was trying to fill this void and mask pain with weed and alcohol and sex and just relationships.
Let me just maybe, and I don't want to interrupt your story, but,
No, you're good.
All of this to say, so today, transgenderism is huge. It almost seems like, it used to be the gay movement or queer or whatever you want to call it. It's changed so many times, but it used to be that. And then once that was legalized in marriage in 2013, it's like, okay, now we've got to move to transgenderism, right? Would you say that is a message that's popular, that's being pushed on kids? Do you feel like that was maybe encouraged to you?
Yeah, so I mean, it's definitely being pushed. It, like, one of the big movements, I would say, is like, you can be whoever you want to be, and like whatever you feel like you are is your truth. And like, feelings are never really valid. I mean, they are 100%. What you're feeling is real. Like, when I was feeling these things, that was true, and I was feeling those things. They were totally valid and real, but it wasn't the reality of who God made me to be. And every piece of who he made me to be was like on purpose. But so it's definitely being pushed. And when I was in school, or actually more so like in this relationship, I was just, even in school, I guess, there were just people around me that were like supportive and this is okay, or there was people who were going through the same thing. And so it was like, the more I hung around them, the more I started to feel like I was supposed to be that way.
Validation, encouragement, yes, in the wrong direction,
right,
you would say. And, you make a good point. Feelings, they were very real. Yeah. But would you say you were being led by feelings? Which I often say in the pulpit, never let your feelings lead you. So, I mean, Luke, you'll agree with this as a football guy, and we're going to talk about you in a minute, but you don't feel like getting up and working out ever. No. But you're glad maybe at 10 a.m. that you got up at 6 a.m. and worked out.
100%.
So you don't feel like it at 6 a.m. Your feelings do not want to do that. But if you will take charge of your feelings, they will follow you, right? They will come under your will. So maybe would you agree with that? That like, I was letting my feelings run and dictate me. And that was causing me to do a whole lot of things trying to fill this void. And just to be clear, I mean, you would say, and you did say publicly, you were without Christ at this time. Even though your grandfather had been a good role model to you, you were completely without Christ, lost as a ball in high weeds.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up in a Christian home, and my family tried to minister to me, which was great, and they did the best that they could. But I never really understood, like, why are we going to church? What is this about? I heard the gospel. I didn't understand, like, because I wasn't experiencing him for myself. And I think part of it was like, oh, like, I'm tired of hearing this. I don't want to hear it anymore. Stop telling me. But for the most part, it was like, I just didn't understand. And I didn't get it. So I guess I'll kind of try to finish up my story a little bit. So eventually I cut this relationship off because I was done with the mental and verbal abuse. from that point on, I was still kind of in and out of toxic relationships, and just living very promiscuously, I guess. I had made some friends who were, one of them was also transgender, and I was living with them, and but eventually, like, we got into this big argument and I had to move home. But while I was living there, I guess this is probably one of the most important pieces of the story, is this person's fiance, during one of these arguments, came to me and started telling me about her relationship with Jesus. They weren't necessarily living for the Lord either, but she had some sort of relationship with him, and she started to share that with me. And that night, I actually asked the Lord into my heart, and I went and bought a Bible, and I started reading it. That didn't drastically change everything, because, like, you can't just snap your fingers and make the reality go away. So after that, he slowly started to change my heart. And so when I moved home after the second argument, I began to feel really confused again. And I'm like, okay, am I supposed to be a guy? Am I supposed to be a girl? I just wasn't sure. I didn't quite feel like a guy anymore, but I didn't entirely feel like a woman. And secretly, without me knowing, my mom had been praying for me, and my grandma had been praying for me for a long time, that the Lord would make me feel like a woman again. And because I had just gone so far away from the little girl that I was when my grandpa was still alive. And so when I moved back home, I was still walking in sin and in relationships and weed and all of that. But eventually I came to the conclusion that the Lord made me to be a girl. And at the time I had short hair, so I started wearing wigs, and I started wearing girl clothes again. It was very weird having to do with that same, like, brain thing. It was, I had to do it in order for my mindset to change. But eventually I started to feel like a girl again, and but I was still walking in sin and trying to fill the void. But one night I was in my car and I was smoking, and I was so, like, I hit rock bottom. I couldn't fill the void myself. And none of us can, but I came to this point of, like, God, I can't do this anymore. I can't do it on my own. I don't know how to fix this pain. And when I came to that place, like, I basically surrendered my life. So even though, like, back at the friend's house, I asked him to come into my heart, but this was where, like, I fully gave my life to him. And Steve has said before in one of his messages, like, I took everything I knew about myself in that moment to everything I knew about God, and I gave it to him. I didn't really know what I was getting into, what I was saying yes to, but I just knew that I needed him. And so in that moment, I just felt his spirit, like, wash over my perspective, and just shift everything. And so from that moment on, I started going to church with my grandma, and I started reading my Bible, and things just, like, drastically shifted from there. It was still a slow process of him changing, like, thing after thing at a time. Eventually I gave up the weed and gave up vaping and drinking and all of that. But that was the moment that I met the Lord. So I wanted to say this at the chapels, but I didn't, it wasn't quite the right time, but I do want to say this now. If you were to talk to anybody in the LGBTQ community, all the other letters that they've added to it now, but I don't even know, it's the whole alphabet. But if you were to talk to somebody who's transgender now, and they are confidently walking in that, actually, it's probably not totally confidently, because the whole idea is that you're insecure with who God made you to be. But if I were to tell them my story, they would probably be like, well, then you weren't really transgender. And I've actually had somebody say that to me one time. And I tried to argue that, but now I would say, you're right. I wasn't. And neither are you, because that's not who you were made to be. That, like, you were made to be, like, whatever you were born as, that is who God purposefully in every detail made you and created you to be. And so, like I said, your feelings about who you are you totally feel that, but it's not the reality of who you are. And when you walk in who God made you to be, it's so much better, because you're not fighting creation. You're not fighting God's true design. I don't know.
Let me ask some questions that they may be offensive. They may be not to you, but I'm trying to ask in a polite way to anyone who would be in that lifestyle, because you don't want to sound ignorant. But I mean, I look at you now, you're a beautiful young lady, right? And you're up on the stage singing beautifully along with this young lady sitting beside you. And when you told that story, I was like, you're kidding. Like I thought, she's got to be kidding. But, here you are telling in front of, 400, 500 students. That took bravery for you to get up and say that. And to tell your story in front of those people. I mean, it took bravery for all of you, but I mean, especially in the climate we're in, where that is such a hostile thing. So help me fill in the gap. Like, I look at you now and I can't even picture this. Okay. So let me encourage you. Like, you looked like a guy. Did you have
Not
a guy?
necessarily.
Did you have a guy name?
Yes, I did change my name. But if you ask my mom, her perspective of me was always her little girl Chloe, But my perspective was like, I dressed like a guy and I cut my hair off, and
you wanted people to call you him,
yes,
he, and all of that, and that was important to you, and all of that. Now, when you look back on all that, how do you feel about all of that?
I was actually just looking through like old pictures and videos last night, and it just makes me cringe and like praise the Lord that I'm not there anymore, because I was so insecure and it was so ugly, and I don't even know like what was that person thinking. Like, I know what I was thinking, but like it was just like, why would you? I don't even know.
Praise the Lord that you've been rescued and you've been changed. So what would you say to the church trying to deal with a culture evangelistically that is saying, call me by my pronoun? I mean, we got people, they go to their job, and their job will have these seminars on how to address people with pronouns and how to do all this. And occasionally they'll come and tell me about it as pastor. What do you think about this? Or I don't even know what I should respond or do or whatever. And so here we're in this culture as a church, and it's in the workplace, it's in school places. Did you, let me ask this question. Did you feel like you could walk into a church when you were your guy self? Did you feel like you could go to people of God? You grew up in church, but you were running from God. Did that matter? I don't know. I don't really know what I'm asking, other than, like, how did you view the church?
Personally, like, not everybody's story is the same. Personally, I wanted nothing to do with it, so I didn't even try. I don't know. My family didn't really like try to force me to come. I was just living such an alternate life. Most of the time, I wasn't even home. Me and my mom weren't really getting along, so as soon as I turned 17, I was able to move out, and I was constantly living with the person I was in that relationship with. So I was just kind of all over the place. I didn't want to be at home, so I was just never really involved with church.
So what would you say to the church today, now that you're on this side of it and you're ministering in churches? Is there anything you would educate the church on to say, hey, here's some things you need to know when you're trying to reach these people with the gospel?
Honestly, like, one, what Kassie was saying, just pray. But I mean, Jesus just says we just have to love people. You just got to love them through it, and not judge them, not put them down because their feelings are real. They are truly walking through that. That doesn't mean it's the reality of who God made them to be, but they are still struggling and fighting. They're fighting Satan. They're fighting the
spiritual
lies
warfare.
And
spiritual warfare.
And that's the number one place that the devil wants to do, is in your mind and in your perspective and in your heart. And so, just that, I'm not saying you should be accepting or supportive and call them by what they want to be called. Like when I look back in the moment, my mom refused to call me Kai or he, him. And in that moment, I was very frustrated. I constantly felt disrespected and unloved by my family, because even in that moment, I didn't feel loved or accepted for who I thought I should be. But looking back, I see my mom loving me through it. Like, she never disowned me. She never told me to get out because of it. She just constantly prayed for me and loved me as the person that God made me to be. So even though I didn't necessarily like it, I see that through all of that. And so, yeah, I would just say do your best to lean into the Lord and love them.
And your mother loved you, but what I love what you're saying, she did not feel like she had to agree with you.
Yeah.
But she stood her ground. She stood on the word, but she loved you. Yeah.
Right.
And that's the challenge for every believer. Wow. Yeah. Well, I'm thankful you're singing on the stage and praising God and telling your story, and the church needs more people like that, and we ought to pray that God rescues more people in those situations. That's what the church is for. So, Chloe, I'm now going to turn to the last guy here. What a gentleman. He sat here quietly. It's Luke Horinko.
Yes, sir.
And I found out Horinko is Ukrainian, and Luke is a Ukrainian spy agent fighting in the Russian war.
Oh, 100%.
So welcome, Luke.
Thank
I
you
hope
so
I
much.
didn't blow your cover.
Don't
I'm
tell
so
anybody,
sorry if
please.
I did. I won't. I won't tell Putin. He does listen to this podcast, though. He told me.
Oh.
So I'm just
Maybe he'll
kidding.
become a Christian.
Maybe he'll become a Christian. Maybe. I'm just kidding. He doesn't listen to this podcast. And Luke is not a double agent.
No.
Are you, Luke?
No, sir.
Okay, I was sent
No,
to
sir.
find out from the CIA.
I'm from Ohio.
Dear CIA, he's not. Love, Mark.
Yes.
Okay, so Ohio.
Yes, sir.
I don't have a catchy
OHIO.
song for Ohio like I did Michigan.
He does, though.
What's your catchy song?
Let's not do that right now. Sorry.
Yeah, we'll save that for another time.
We will?
Yeah.
All right. What part of Ohio? Right outside of Columbus?
Sunbury. Yeah, like 20 minutes away from Columbus.
Yep. Told you I had my friend that lived in Columbus.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Yes, sir. I know exactly where that is.
So, Luke, when you started your high school career, football was everything. You were a linebacker.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
A little bit of offensive line,
You're
too.
not going to believe this. I was a linebacker.
Were you really?
Yeah. Have you ever heard of the Houston Oilers?
Mm-mm.
No? You've never heard of the Houston Oilers? Have you ever heard of the Houston Oilers?
It sounds very familiar.
Very familiar. Timothy,
So
you
that's
ever heard of the
probably a
Houston
yes.
Oilers? Okay, well, they later became the Tennessee Titans. They sold out, and they became the Titans. But when they were the Oilers, I was a linebacker for them back in the 80s. Do you believe that? You are looking like you really believe what I'm saying.
Really?
I'm totally kidding. But there used to be an NFL team called the Houston Oilers.
I was really like,
you guys are
that's cool.
young. Yeah, look at me, Luke. Look at me. Do I look
dang.
like a linebacker?
Why have we not talked
for
about
the
that
Houston
before?
Oilers? Well, I just didn't want to brag.
Oh, yeah.
But
I get it.
anyway, Luke, you were going into football, and tell us about your story. Your dream was to be a D1 college football player.
Hey, yeah, from a very, very young age. It was kind of my everything, my goal. I was kind of bound and determined to do that. Do you want me to tell everything?
Yeah, tell everything. Start with after the day I was born. No, I'm just kidding.
So I was born. So actually, up until I was not allowed to play football, and all middle school, my mom would not let me. She was afraid I was going to get hurt, which was very true. She knew better because I got hurt a ton, but that's okay. So freshman year, actually this is 8th grade year, my mom actually gets diagnosed with stage 4 breast cancer, and she homeschooled us before. She was kind of my everything. Our family, she kind of held everything together. She was my everything. It was awesome. Raised us for our whole lives, homeschooled us. We did everything with her. So she was diagnosed with cancer that would hit our family super hard. We were not expecting it. It was a long journey. She was gone for weeks at a time for treatments, constantly in the hospital, in and out. She actually went to Mexico a few times for some special treatment she thought she could do naturally, which it kind of worked a little bit, but it just got to the point where nothing natural was going to help. Just kind of started eating away, and she had to make the decision to do chemo and radiation and all that stuff. So that was really hard on my family. It was definitely a curveball in my life. So we actually got sent to school for the first time. That was also a curveball my freshman year. So going into freshman year, I went to school. I think it was the summer of before freshman year, something like that. My brother at the same time was also diagnosed with cancer. They were both battling it at the same time. It was really difficult having two people. My brother was probably the brother I was closest with at the time. He was my bruh, still is. I love that man. He was diagnosed. That was super hard as well, because it's hard having one person struggle with cancer in the family, and then having two. It's a whole nother ball game. He was constantly kind of the same thing, kind of in and out of the hospital, treatments and stuff. Wasn't easy, but yeah. So I started going to school with my other siblings. I have five other siblings. Started going to school. That was a huge culture shock in a good way. I loved it. And then that winter of freshman year, my mom ended up passing away, which was super, super hard. Really hit me in a really, really hard way. And that's kind of where my football story starts coming in. I was looking for something to kind of heal, let anger, let pain out. And I was playing basketball and running and stuff, but I was like, okay, I need something more. I need to hit somebody. I know that sounds bad, but so yeah, my dad, he allowed me to play football that following year. So going into sophomore year is actually when I started. So I started playing, fell in love with it, but I didn't heal from my mom's death in a very healthy way at all. It kind of was just all, okay, let's just go hit somebody harder. Let's just go hit the gym a stupid amount. Was in there way too much. That was just kind of the only way. I had a relationship with God from a really early age, but I was not leaning on him for anything. I was praying. Actually, that year, I was honestly just, after she died, I knew she had died, but it was kind of that fact that, like, I loved her so much that I just wished she would come back. And she was gone for so long at weeks and times. I was like, okay, maybe she's just in the hospital. I knew it wasn't true, and it sounds weird, but like it was just that thought of, okay.
No, you were trying to cope.
Yeah, exactly.
And so you were telling yourself,
exactly,
she's going to come back.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
That's exactly what it was, and that's, I knew deep down inside it wasn't true, but it was just like I just wanted to believe that. I wanted her come back, and so
ironically, the two royals, Princess Diana's boys, Harry and William, tell the same story. Harry tells that story in his book, that in the same way he did not believe that his mother had really died. He thought that people were just telling him that, and he kept thinking, she is going to come and get us. Yeah. They're telling me she's dead, but she's going to come and get us from Eton, and we're all going to get away together. And it took him a long time to come to that realization, she's not coming to get me. And you say that. Yeah. And I think about what he said, and that's a very real thing for very young real. People who lose their...
Especially when you're so close to somebody, it's just like, you don't want to accept it. And it's like, but you have to, but there's that certain point where you're like, I just won't accept it right now. I'm not gonna believe it, even as hard as it is. It's just not gonna. I'm not gonna accept it right now. But eventually, I mean, I had to. Obviously, it just got to the point where it was like, okay, it's long enough. You just got to accept it. So yeah, I started just indulging myself in sports and popularity and everything, kind of myself. If I wasn't the best at whatever I was doing, it would eat me up. If I wasn't the most popular, if I wasn't liked by somebody, yeah, it would just wreck me. So that was just my whole goal in life, was to be the most popular, the most liked, the best, the biggest name, the kind of anything in that realm that you can imagine. And it worked out sometimes. I mean, I had my moments, but it wasn't anything near to what God wanted for me in my life. He doesn't call us to just want fame and glory, or he wants us to glorify his name. He wants me to bear his image, not bear my own image. And that's not at all what I was doing by any means. And I was going to a Christian school, actually. From freshman, I graduated from a Christian school. I was playing football at a public school because we didn't have a football team. So I was getting the both double dosage kind of the public school realm and the Christian school. And I grew up in a Christian home, everything. I was saved at an early age, kind of like what I said. But my walk with God didn't really get real until junior year. I went to a Strength to Stand concert. I don't know if you've heard of that.
Who is it?
Strength to Stand. It's in Pigeon Forge, Tennessee.
Oh, okay.
It's a big, like a mini Passion. I don't know if you know what that is.
Yeah,
but it's a big, huge youth conference. I went to that with my youth group, and that really just, my eyes were open. That's kind of where worship first started hitting me, because there's just nothing like worshiping with thousands and thousands of young people, and just kind of how on fire for Jesus these people were. And I was like, okay, I want that. And I wanted it bad because I didn't know what else to do. I was so at like, okay, I can't keep filling myself with stuff that isn't gonna help me in the long run. So yeah, I don't know if I want to say I rededicated my life to Christ, but I just kind of where I was like, okay, I'm gonna start making this my real, and I'm gonna start living out my faith in a more visible way, with being inside of a public school, and everybody at a Christian school obviously isn't Christian. I mean, this is kind of reality. So just kind of making my faith my own, living that out in that way was kind of huge. And so yeah, I just kept going on. It did. I did start living it out more. People were telling me it was obvious, and I was talking to my friends more about Christianity, inviting them to church and stuff. And it got kind of to my senior year. I didn't know what the heck I wanted to do. Well, I mean, I did, but like, so I wanted to obviously play football in college. That was my dream, and it was becoming realer and realer as the year went on, because just some success and stuff. I was like, okay, this is actually going to be amazing. My biggest goal was to ultimately make my mom proud, because I wasn't academically, it wasn't really my thing, and so I was like, okay, I'm going to go to college and hopefully be a big shot there. And
you wanted to play for Ohio State.
That would have been the end goal, yeah, but I would have gone to a smaller college to they would have got me prepped to go play, because it's kind of hard though.
But you did get an offer at Liberty University.
I talked to a few coaches. I didn't actually I got offered
okay.
at a bunch of other D2. I got one from Charleston Southern. I don't know if you've heard of that, D1. Bunch of other colleges in Ohio and on the Midwest. Liberty would have been really cool though. That's a dope school.
So you talked to them. I know I thought Steve said Liberty, but you had some offers.
Yeah, way too many communications. Yeah.
Okay, so you had all that going on, which is a lot of kids' dreams here.
Yeah.
You know, they're trying to get to the SEC or whatever. Super hard feat. So you were pretty good, but you said the Lord convicted me that I wasn't putting Him first. So you changed your whole course of action.
That's exactly right. Yeah, I mean, I was still kind of just playing for myself. I wanted to be the best. I wanted to get as much glory, as much fame, be as popular as I possibly could. And it worked out, but it wasn't anything kind of like what I was saying before. I mean, it's just God doesn't call us to be that. It's okay to be great at something. It's okay to be popular, but when that's your only goal in life, he's not gonna glorify that in the way that he's called us to glorify him, if that makes sense. So yeah, he really just convicted me like hard. I don't really remember a specific time. I just kind of think over a course of a few months when I was just kind of figuring, because the whole college recruiting thing, it's next level on how hard, and like it's a ton of stuff. So it's kind of getting overwhelming. I'm like, do I really want to do this? Because school wasn't my thing, like I said before, and it was like, okay, am I going to college just to play football? Is this really going to be worth it? Blah, blah, blah. So it just he just really convicted me. He was like, why don't you just rethink this, rethink your goals in life, and just put me first in that area, the one area that you're not letting go of your life, kind of thing. And it was like, I don't really want to, but we'll see what happens, kind of thing. And so it was like the spring of my senior year. I'm actually about ready to commit to a D2 college. They were very good. And my grandpa just randomly is like, have you heard of Life Action? And I'm like, well, they had come to my church, but he's like, have you thought about them? Because I was doing worship at my school. And so, yeah, he's like that. And I was like, no, not really. Didn't really want to accept it because I was like, that's not really my dream at all. So, and then I kept kind of pushing it under. I was like, you know what, I'm going to go play. And he kept bringing it up constantly. Like, have you thought about it? Have you looked up their website? I was like, nope. So, yeah, he kept doing that. And I was kind of got to the point where I was like, okay, I'll look it up. And so I did. And a few things happened with college, coach, where like stuff wasn't lining up. And I was like, yeah, I don't know about that anymore. And just God was really just changing my heart is what it was. And I was just really like, okay, I'm going to put my trust in you. And if you want to make it possible, then make it possible. And it was just kind of like, just like that. He kind of just opened doors, closed doors. And I was like, okay, this is kind of obvious. Just get me here if you want me here. And so that's what he did.
And now you sing lead. You're a male lead singer, is that right? Yeah, on the stage, which is pretty impressive. So football player to singer. What would you say to any young man who is all about trying to live for the self or the world or whatever? Would you give any advice to them?
There's nothing wrong with wanting to be good. There's nothing wrong with wanting to be great. I mean, that's actually biblical, is to be good. But when that's your everything, and when you're not putting God first, that's when it becomes the issue, because what's the point of being successful if you're not going to glorify God's name? And that's kind of the point that I was like, if I'm just going to give glory to myself, where in the world is the glory coming from where's God going to get the glory when he kind of gave me the gifts and the talents that he gave me? And so that's just kind of, he changed my whole mindset over a while. But like, I would say to anybody out there, really just think about the purpose of what you're doing, if that's sports, if that's music, if that's academics, if that's anything. If you're not putting God first and you're not giving him the glory for the skills and the talents that he's given you, just think about that, and kind of, I hope that the mindset of that changes, and because it'll affect your everyday life, I guess is kind of what I'm saying.
And you saw with your mother, which you're still affected by that. I mean, it's obvious, you saw with your mother the fleeting, just life is fleeting, right? So you only get one chance. It goes quick. Do what's most important.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I mean, same thing with my brother too. He actually did survive. He's doing great, cancer free. But it could have been the same for him too, and that would have been reckoning. But I'm just like you said, life is short. You never know if you're gonna die in a car accident. You never know if cancer's gonna hit you. You never know if your best friends, you're never gonna see him again. I mean, it's just like, you never know when God's gonna call somebody home, and that's just kind of reality. So just don't ever waste a minute. Any opportunity you get, use it for God's glory. And that'd be my biggest thing right now.
Well, guys, it's great having you on the show today, and I hope that the church gets to know your testimony. I hope you're an encouragement to the people that listen who weren't able to hear you live, but now they go, wow, there were people that were ministering to us who had these stories. God's used these stories for His glory, and it's good. You're all walking with Jesus today. That's such an encouragement. So thank you guys for coming out.
Well, thank
you
you
for
so
being
much.
honest. I know it was hard at times. It's hard to share your life story, right? One day I'm going to get Timothy's life story. Begins on another planet. But anyway, good deal. Well, thanks so much.
Thank you so much.
And that wraps up this edition of Footnotes. And that's another episode of our podcast, Footnotes. We drop our podcast each Friday, so be sure to tune in, check us out, and listen. Footnotes is a ministry of Broadway Baptist Church located in Southaven, Mississippi. We're located right outside of the Metro Memphis area. You can learn more about us by visiting us online at broadwaychurch.org. Until next time, it's Footnotes.